In the 1990s, European late-night TV was like this secret world that most people didn't talk about openly. It felt different, hazy, quiet, almost dreamlike, while most channels were showing action movies and sitcom reruns during prime time. There was another kind of cinema that only appeared when the lights went out, when the house was quiet, when the TV signal was just barely coming through. This was the age of scrambled broadcasts, imported VHS tapes hidden in the back of rental stores, and those soft-lit scenes that seemed to exist outside of normal time. Everything moved slower. Everything felt more deliberate. Icons who didn't just perform, they defined the entire mood of that era. These weren't mainstream celebrities, they weren't on magazine covers at your local newsstand. They were something more mysterious, more elusive. Their presence lived somewhere between fantasy and memory. Distant, elegant, impossible to forget. Some became genuine stars. Others appeared only briefly, like a flash in the dark. But together, they built something remarkable. A legacy that still echoes in late-night nostalgia and whispered memories of a glowing screen behind a closed door. These are the legends of Ciné Privé, and this is their story. By the end of the 1990s, Ciné Privé wasn't just some secret people whispered about anymore. It had become recognizable, almost mainstream in certain circles. And nobody embodied that evolution quite like Clara Morgan. French-born, with this calm voice and an image that somehow blended elegance with just enough edge, Clara arrived at exactly the right moment. That golden glow of late-night cinema was beginning to shift, becoming more polished, more visible, and she walked right into that change with quiet confidence. Here's what set Clara apart. She carried the grace of the earlier icons, sure, but she brought something completely new: media awareness. She didn't just appear in those soft-lit scenes and then vanish. She showed up on magazine covers, gave interviews, eventually hosted television shows. She understood something the others didn't, or maybe didn't want to. She knew how to move between mystery and mainstream, how to belong to the screen, while also belonging to the moment. Her performances were refined, magnetic. Where the earlier stars often felt distant or underground, Clara walked right into the spotlight. And she stayed there. She didn't disappear when the credits rolled, she transformed, and in doing so, she became more than just a symbol of an era. She became its bridge to whatever came next. There was always something different about Laure Saint-Clair. She didn't demand your attention the way others did. She just appeared, and somehow that was more powerful. At a time when a lot of performers were leaning into boldness and spectacle, Laure brought this quiet kind of presence. She never rushed through a scene. She moved like a slow breath, as if the camera had to catch up to her pace. With soft features and this gaze that seemed to belong to another era entirely, she felt like a character from some forgotten European film. Distant, beautiful, just out of reach. There was a sadness in her eyes, a kind of stillness that you don't see much anymore. And in a genre that was often built entirely on performance and energy, that subtle restraint made her unforgettable. Her scenes weren't loud, they weren't fast, they lingered. Lit by candlelight, wrapped in slow fades and long silences, they invited you to just sit there and feel something. Laure never tried to control the spotlight. She let it pass over her gently, and in doing so became one of the most memorable faces of that entire world. For a lot of people, she wasn't just part of Ciné Privé, she was the final moment before the lights faded out for good. If Laure was a whisper, Dragixa was a spark, sudden, bright, impossible to ignore. Born in France with Balkan roots and this completely untamed energy, she brought something totally different to the screen. Where others moved with slow measured precision, Dragixa just charged. She didn't ease into a scene, she took it over. There was always something alive behind her eyes. A smirk, a sudden shift in posture, a look that suggested anything could happen in the next 5 seconds. She didn't just act, she reacted. To the camera, to the mood, to the moment itself. And that unpredictability? Electric. In France, in Italy, across late-night satellite channels throughout Europe, she became a favorite. Not because she was the most polished, but because she was completely present. Her scenes felt less like rehearsed fantasy and more like real emotion slipping through the cracks. Wild, playful, sometimes defiant, always captivating. And then, just as quickly as she rose, she was gone. No farewell, no slow fade out, just a flash of movement in the dark, and then nothing. Some stars stay in memory because of their beauty. Dragixa stayed because of her impact. By the late 1990s, as the golden age of Ciné Privé was starting to fade, a new kind of figure appeared on screen. Calm, composed, completely unlike anyone who came before. Katsuni didn't announce herself with drama or excess. She didn't need to. With a gaze that held completely steady and movements that felt deliberate and precise, she brought this sense of control that was rare for the genre. Of French and Vietnamese descent, she didn't fit any existing mold. And that's exactly what made her stand out. She carried herself with quiet power, the kind that doesn't ask for attention but earns it just by being present. Every scene she entered felt different. There was no need for big theatrical performance. Her stillness was the performance. Katsuni rose quickly in Europe, captivating late-night audiences with a presence that felt both modern and somehow timeless. But what really set her apart was how far she went beyond that world. While most stars of scene privé remained local legends, Katsuni crossed over. She found major success in the United States, not by changing who she was, but by staying exactly the same. In an industry often driven by intensity and spectacle, she brought something else entirely: elegance, intention, and this incredible sense of calm in front of the camera. She won awards, built a global fan base, earned respect not just for her image, but for her professionalism, and how carefully she shaped her entire path. She wasn't just adapting to change, she was the change. Katsuni marked the moment when After Dark cinema evolved, became more global, more self-aware, more refined. And in a space that often rewarded noise and energy, she proved that stillness could be just as powerful. In the mid-1990s, as satellite TV and imported VHS tapes were quietly reshaping late-night viewing across Europe, one name started surfacing again and again, not because she was chasing the spotlight, but because the camera simply couldn't look away. Sylvia Saint emerged from the former Czechoslovakia at a time when ciné privé was shifting. The genre had grown more stylized, more international, and Sylvia fit that moment with uncanny precision. Her appearance was striking. Blonde, composed, classically beautiful in that symmetrical way. But what really set her apart was how little she gave away emotionally. Unlike others in the scene, she didn't rely on expressive gestures or exaggerated presence. Instead, there was this calculated stillness in everything she did. Scenes slowed down when she entered. Movements became minimal, deliberate. She didn't need to fill the space. She reduced it, pulled it inward, until everything centered around her. While Europe embraced her early on, it was in the United States where her image became truly iconic. At a time when American audiences were used to a more direct, more overt style, Sylvia introduced a completely different visual language, cooler, more restrained, almost architectural in how she held the frame. Her work circulated everywhere, first through VHS and specialty networks, then across magazines, collector series, convention culture. But what's remarkable is how little she seemed to change under all that attention. There was no shift toward the mainstream, no attempt to soften or adapt. She remained still consistent, distant, and controlled. Sylvia Saint didn't just succeed internationally, she redefined what success could look like in this genre. Less about volume, more about precision. Less about presence, more about control over it. Her legacy isn't tied to one performance or one role. It's the cumulative effect of 1,000 moments where the screen went quiet, not because nothing was happening, but because something very specific was being held just out of reach. In an era full of motion and noise, Sylvia brought the power of restraint, and that's what made her unforgettable. By the early 1990s, ciné privé had found its rhythm. Soft lighting, slow pacing, this mysterious elegance that made everything feel slightly out of reach. But then came Zara Whites, and everything sped up just a little. Originally from the Netherlands, Zara entered the scene with a completely different kind of energy. She smiled more, moved faster, looked straight into the lens without any hesitation. Her presence didn't suggest distance, it invited familiarity. At a time when most performers were cultivating this air of mystery, she leaned into recognition. Zara wasn't just featured in late-night films, she was everywhere. Her name circulated in TV interviews, her image appeared in glossy publications. Her career extended beyond the screen into something closer to actual celebrity. She represented a shift, not away from the genre's roots, but toward its evolution into something more public. While others became myths through silence, Zara became a brand through visibility. And that accessibility didn't dilute her presence at all. On the contrary, it redefined what power could look like in this space. She wasn't waiting to be discovered in the shadows of some soft focus scene. She walked right into the spotlight as if to say, "You already know who I am." In many ways, she was the first to really bridge scene privé and pop culture. Her performances still carried all the sensuality and style of the genre, but there was always a wink, this kind of knowing charm that made you feel like you were in on something. Zara Whites didn't just appear on screen. She made the screen feel brighter, faster, more alive. And in doing so, she proved that even in a genre built on suggestion, confidence could be its own kind of allure. By the late 1990s, something was shifting around ciné privé. That slow dreamlike tone that had defined the genre for nearly a decade was starting to feel out of sync with the pace of the world around it. And into that space stepped Nina Roberts. French, magnetic, unmistakably direct. She didn't enter quietly. Where others floated through candlelit rooms, Nina arrived with urgency, as if the scene had been waiting for her to wake it up. Her performances were less about suggestion, more about intensity. She didn't keep her distance from the camera, she confronted it. There was always this feeling that something real and possibly volatile was simmering beneath the surface. Nina brought an emotional charge that set her completely apart. She wasn't performing a fantasy, she was pushing against it, testing its limits. Sometimes she was calm, almost indifferent. Other times, impulsive and unpredictable. That tension, that refusal to stay within the lines gave her work a rawness the genre rarely allowed. She didn't last long in the spotlight, but she didn't need to. Her impact came from contrast, from breaking the soft rhythm of Ciné Privé and injecting it with something louder, faster, more immediate. In many ways, Nina marked the end of an era. Not because she closed the door on it, but because she opened a new one. A reminder that even in the most stylized genres, there's always room for disruption. By the early 2000s, the world that had once defined European late-night cinema was changing fast. The glow of Ciné Privé, warm, soft, slow, was beginning to fade. But before it disappeared completely, it gave us one last name to remember. Monica Sweetheart arrived at the exact moment when everything was shifting. VHS was on its way out, satellite TV was evolving, and those quiet corners of after-dark entertainment were being overtaken by the speed of the internet. She came from the Czech Republic, a region already known for producing striking on-screen talent. But Monica brought something else. This calm, youthful presence that felt like it belonged to both the past and whatever came next. Her look was modern, but never artificial. Her demeanor confident, but never aggressive. There was still a trace of that old atmosphere, the soft lighting, the slow pacing, that understated tension, but it carried a different weight with her. You could feel the moment closing, and somehow she was carrying it with care. She didn't try to reinvent the genre. She simply gave it one more spark, one more name that felt exactly right for the time. For a lot of people, Monica Sweetheart marked the final moment when Ciné Privé still felt like itself, a last breath before everything changed.